morning, everyone. On behalf of the Department of Computer Science Engineering, Dr. MGR Educational and Research Institute, we welcome our guest speaker on the day, Dr. Harshan Jagdish, and all the participants for this third day program. We have three schedules on today. The first session is going to be handled by Dr. Harshan Jagdish. Really, in this note, just I would like to thank him along with the welcome part because when I just mailed him, immediately he has accepted our request and joined with us today. Thank you for accepting our request, sir. I hope this session would be useful for you. Really, we, the faculty members, are waiting for the resource person from IIT to share your experience with us during and for the other next 1.5 hours. So with this, I request my colleague, Dr. Victor Sudha Jaj, Professor of Department of Computer Science and Engineering, to take over the session and introduce the guest speaker. Session handed over to Victor, ma'am.
Good morning. I, Dr. G. Victor Sudha Jaj, welcome you all for the third day of Atal FDP on cyber security using ML practical applications. Let me start with the quote by our former President, Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam, about learning. Learning is creativity. Creativity leads to thinking. Thinking provides knowledge, and knowledge makes you great. Yes, that is the power of learning. Today, we are going to learn from three very interesting and informative sessions from the eminent speakers. They are the security connected devices in next generation networks by Dr. Harshan Jagdish. Then latest technologies, a boon or ban, a forensic study by Mr. Bhaskar. And the third session is going to be on art of IoT exploitation by Mr. Veerababu. Now, we start with the first session, the security of connected devices in next generation networks by Dr. Harshan Jagdish. To talk about SAR, currently he is working as assistant professor in the Department of Electrical Engineering, Indian Institute of Technology, Delhi. He received PhD from the Department of Electrical Communication Engineering, Indian Institute of Science, India. Prior to joining IIT Delhi, SAR was with Cyber Security Group at Advanced Digital Science Center, Singapore. Before that, he held postdoctoral position at the Division of Mathematical Science, Nanyang Technological University, Singapore, and at the Department of Electrical and Computer System Engineering at Monash University, Australia. His research interest includes security, wireless network, and application of information and coding theory to communication and storage. Sir, it's our honor to have you here today. Now, I kindly request Sir to take over the session. Please, sir.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you for a very kind introduction. So it's my pleasure to present some of our research findings and talk about security related issues in wireless networks and share it with all of you. So I would look forward to engaging with very interesting discussions with all of you in the due course of this entire program. So let me just share my screen. Okay, so I hope the screen is visible.
Yes, sir, you can proceed now, sir.
Okay, thank you. So in the next 1 hour to 15 minutes, I'm going to talk about security issues related to next generation networks. So I'm going to build on many things towards the topic. The first thing would be what is next generation networks? Why is it different from the conventional networks that today we use quite explicitly? And what are the various security related issues of these networks? Some of the contents of this work are the research work done in collaboration with my students, Rohit Joshi and Manish Rao. So both of them are master students at IIT Delhi. So just to give you a big picture of security issues, very frequently now and then we keep hearing about security threats on either public infrastructure networks or enterprise networks, right? So, very recently we read a news article on how this fitness app Garmin, was affected by a ransomware, and then because of some of the security breaches. And likewise, there are very well known security threats on critical infrastructure, for example, the one that took place in Ukraine recently. And also, there have been potential or many security threats also reported in the field of urban transportation. So as shown in the pictures here, when I talk about urban transportation, it is about, let's say, you take an example of an unmanned train system, right? So it's like driverless trains. Now, what happens is this is entire cooperation of signaling schemes where trains don't have drivers, and then these trains are remotely controlled by a control center, which is geographically supported, situated somewhere else. And then the entire execution of operations of the trains must be controlled by the control center through a sequence of wireless commands, right? So, for example, what can happen is, there could be a wired connection all the way from the control center to the stations. And these wired connections could be backhaul networks, which are extremely reliable. But however, in the last leg, because these trains are mobile entities, then we cannot incorporate any cable-based connections, right? So as a result, the last leg of this entire automated driverless trains have to be wireless, which means there must be some sort of wireless transmitters which are uniformly placed next to the tracks. And then as the train moves on the track, it would have its transceivers at its end, and then it would have to pick up signals from the transmitters. And then depending on the commands shared by the control center, it either needs to accelerate or slow down or stop at a given center and so on. Essentially, it's completely controlled by the control center without a driver in the train, right? So there have been reports in the recent past where such networks applicable to urban transportation system, if they are compromised in the way of security threats, that can give rise to catastrophic consequences, and which would in turn compromise the safety of the passengers, right? So this is one example where security of wireless networks must be made strong in order to provide safety for the passengers and in general for the infrastructure, right? So moving on, we are going to witness applications of wireless networks in new arenas. So for example, as on today, 5G networks already encompasses a lot of applications. It could be vehicular networks, it could be IoTs. Especially with IoTs, we already see them with strong applications in industrial Internet of Things, where we could have a network of sensors for improving the efficiency of the operations in industrial setting. And then because that forms a sort of an enterprise network, it is important to ensure the safety of these networks so that any adversarial manipulations doesn't affect the performance of these networks. So likewise, again, talking about urban transportation, which also comes under the class of vehicular networks. That's also, as mentioned in the previous slide, it's an extremely important venue for keeping the security of these networks, right? So in general, what happens is as there is significant development in the technology, And then when we design networks from a deployment point of view, it is very important to design a network so that all the tasks are completed in an efficient manner in terms of the use cases as well as the resource constraints that we have. However, at the same time, it is important to envisage new threats on these systems so that and then we have to implement some mitigation techniques along with the regular functioning of these infrastructures so that we would be prepared to handle any adversarial threats on our system. And this, as I mentioned, is particularly important in the context of critical infrastructures, right? Now, broadly, as most of you know, security issues belong to three types. We can actually bin them into three classes. One of them is the confidentiality, where whenever there is message that is communicated from one device to another device, it should not be eavesdropped by a third party who does not have access to this network. That's a good old confidentiality measure. And the second measure is usually what is known as the availability feature. This is when, so let's say you have a vehicle, it's an autonomous vehicle, which is requesting for regular communication from a control center in order to maneuver this autonomous car on the road. Then we need to ensure that the communication link between this car, which is mobile, and the control center is alive all the time. Right? Otherwise, so for example, there could be an adversary who could try to execute what is very well known as a denial of service attack. These are called as DDoS attacks, right? Now, if we execute some sort of a DDoS attacks on those links, then the connection between these two devices would get cut, and then as a result, this would lead to catastrophic consequences, right? So we always want to ensure availability. Right. And then finally, there is this important feature of integrity, which means that any message that we either store or communicate with from device to device, we should ensure that these are not manipulated by a third party without consent. Right. So that's called as the integrity. So in general, if we want to keep any system or a network secure, we have to take utmost precaution in order to keep all these three features safe: confidentiality, availability, and integrity. I mean, these form the fundamental pillars of features in as far as security is concerned. Right. So in this particular session, I'm only going to focus on the confidentiality feature. I'm not going to focus on the integrity and the availability features, although they are equally important. As I said, these three are different dimensions of research, according to me. And, the other two dimensions would also require significant amount of time and effort to focus on, right? But this session, we are going to focus on confidentiality. Right now, talking about confidentiality, I understand that we all come from a computer science sort of background where we have learned or might have also taught basics of security, cryptography in the past. But then, apologies, I would need to go back to these basics in the first set of slides in order to build the context. Right. So some of the information in the next few slides may be redundant to most of you because we all come from the same background of cryptography, security, and so on. But then for the sake of self-contained, right? So I'm going to talk about it a bit more, right? So traditionally, confidentiality is ensured by the use of crypto primitives. And what essentially we know is that the legitimate parties that intend to communicate with each other will use some sort of encryption technique in order to ensure that the messages which are either stored or transmitted in the air cannot be read by a third party, right? And as we know, we can broadly classify this into two types. One is symmetric key encryption techniques, where both the legitimate parties, in this particular case, it is Alice who is transmitting, or Bob, either way. They have to possess identical key, and no one else has this key. And as a result, the underlying plain text, which is encrypted with this key, is also secure, right? So this is very well known. Whereas on the other hand, we also know that there are asymmetric key encryption methods, such as public key encryption. For example, RSA is one such well-known example, right? So this is where the receiver would carefully generate keys, one of them being private, the other one being public, and then it would.
So dear participants, can you mute your mic?
Yeah. So maybe I will. Yeah, thank you. So,
Sorry, sir.
Yeah, thank you. So in the context of public key encryption, this receiver would carefully design a pair of keys, and then it would only distribute the public key to the transmitter and would keep the private key with itself. For example, Bob does this job. And as a result, anybody who would like to communicate securely with Bob can use this public key, encrypt it, and then send it to Bob, and then Bob can recover because Bob has the private key, right? So these are two well-known methodologies for keeping the messages confidential. But as we know from the basics of cryptography, implementing a public key encryption technique is more complex, is challenging, especially when we have resource constraints on our networks. What I mean to say is, for example, our devices could be small sensors with some computing capability, and then they may be battery operated, and as a result, in order for the device to sustain for longer amount of time, then it needs to have complexity constraints, and as a result, right? So if we make use of public key encryption techniques, it is well known that that can perhaps drain the battery much faster than compared to the symmetric encryption techniques. For example, it could be AES. Right. So we are going to focus on symmetric encryption techniques for the rest of the talk, and think about implementing these symmetric key encryption techniques in practice. Then, if it is a traditional setting wherein a base station talks to a mobile user, for example, how we use our mobile phones, then it is rather straightforward, right? Because we have our SIM, and then as a result, what happens is the base station or the core network would know the identity of this particular SIM ID, and this common knowledge of this identity can actually help these two nodes to derive a common key, which cannot be replicated by anybody, third party, right? And the result, once they generate these keys at their sites individually, they could subsequently make use of these keys to encrypt their messages using any standard symmetric key encryption techniques, right? So that's mostly straightforward. Now, what happens is, with next generation networks, it's not going to be communication between only a mobile device and a base station, or let's say your laptop with your Wi-Fi router, right? It's not going to be the same. We are already envisaging new applications where devices can talk to devices, because with crowded networks, in order to reduce the burden on the base station or the control center, devices can talk to devices without really having to route the packets through the base station, right? So that's one common application of device-to-device communication. Another application that is usually well spoken about is vehicle-to-vehicular communication. So what happens is, with in a vehicular network setting, vehicles would need to coordinate among each other in order to facilitate seamless movement of the traffic, which is very futuristic. In such a case, the communication between the entities have to be very short. So these are typically called as low latency communication, which means there is a requirement that a message must be sent to another vehicle and then must be received back, and within few milliseconds of time, because that is the amount of resolution with which all the vehicles need to coordinate among each other. In such a case, having to route the packets all the way to the base station and then receive it, process it, it's going to incur a lot of time. And then that is not really advised for such applications. So therefore, we would need to think about how can cars in a given region can communicate among each other. But then, if you think about cars communicating with each other, it's not like a base station, right? So, I mean, a car A doesn't have anything known about car B to start with, right? Which was the case with the base station, because base station always could fetch the SIM ID of the SIM number of the mobile phone. But whereas another user wouldn't have access to this information, and as a result, there is nothing common between them in order to have a key, right? So what it implies is, if we want to implement symmetric key encryption techniques in a device-to-device setting, then implementing that is going to be a challenge, because they need a key, right? And then they don't have a key, they don't have any common information between them. They need to have a common information which is secure and accessible, which means they need to generate the key on their own first, okay? And then they have to make use of these keys in order to keep their messages confidential by using classical encryption techniques, right? So that's the challenge. So generation of keys among multiple entities has to be done explicitly, and it is not as implicit as the way it works between a mobile node and a mobile phone and a base station. Now, again, as most of us know, key exchange mechanisms are very well known in theory, and also most of these algorithms have also been applied in practice. And one such algorithm that we are very familiar with is what is called as Diffie-Hellman key exchange. I'm just going to quickly go through it to set the context again. So what happens in this case is Alice and Bob, these are the legitimate nodes. They would like to extract a symmetric key between them because they don't have anything in common to start with. All right. And then, as usual, we have an eavesdropper who is very keen on watching the conversation between the two, so that she could tap as much information as possible from their conversation, right? So and then she would know that these two nodes don't have a key, and therefore she would also want to sort of reconstruct the same key at her side, so that she can decrypt the messages whenever Alice and Bob communicate with a suitable encryption mechanism, right? And how does this Diffie-Hellman key exchange works? So basically, Alice is going to pick a random number and send it to Bob, and and then what it does is it picks a random number, let's call it A, and then both of them agree on a common base, let's call a number G, and then Alice is going to multiply G with itself a number of times, and then it's going to communicate G power A in the air. Okay, that's what goes through the channel. Similarly, Bob is also going to pick a random number B, and then it's going to compute G power B at his side, and then he's going to communicate this to Alice. And now, using this, Alice, upon receiving G power B from Bob, because it knows A to itself, which is private, it can compute, it can again raise it to the power of A, and because of this, it's going to obtain G power AB. And similarly, Bob, by receiving G power A, is sent by Alice, and it knows the value of B, and it's going to do G power A whole power B, and as a result, it would also end up in G power AB, right? So remarkably, at the end of this procedure, we can see that both these entities have a common number, which is G power AB, right? And then if you see what happens to Eve is actually constantly listening to their conversation, and then Eve can actually listen to G power A because it was in the air. Eve can listen to G power B, it was also in the air. It also knows the exponent, perhaps. And then the interesting part here is, although it knows G power A and G power B and it knows the exponent, it cannot figure out A and B, because A and B were private to Alice and Bob. And why is that possible? That's possible because all these G, A, and B, they take values from a finite field or a finite set of alphabets. So if you think about these G, A, and B as real numbers, then this matter is extremely simple, because if Eve observes G power A, then as basics to math, I could just apply log to this and then do a base G. And then if I do that, I can extract, I'm going to get A times log G. And then because G is known, I can extract the value of A and also the value of B. And then once I get the value of A and B, I can compute G power AB myself as the eavesdropper, and then that is done. But what happens in the case of discrete points of G and AB, you cannot apply log. And that's why, as most of us know, this is called as a discrete log problem, right? And what it means is, even if Eve knows the value of G, it needs to exhaustively compute all possible exponents of G. Okay, and then it only needs to match whether G power A matches with their exponent, and it needs to do it for similarly for G power P. But then that's the whole point of security, right? So if Eve has to exhaustively do this for every exponent, and then imagine if the space of all the values for this exponent is large, right? 128 bits or 156 bits, then what happens is it becomes extremely complex to implement this, and then this basically is an exhaustive stuff, right? So and then and that's the whole point of crypto primitives, because it prevents the attacker or the eavesdropper to recover the information in a bounded amount of time, right? So this is what is Diffie-Hellman key exchange. Now, in this particular talk, I'm going to talk about an alternative to Diffie-Hellman key exchange. Okay, why do we require an alternative? I'm going to talk about it in detail, right? So Diffie-Hellman key exchange, now it is well known that the entire procedure of taking up numbers in a finite field and then computing their exponents by satisfying their own algebraic operations. Now this is already well known to be computationally complex. I mean, forget about this operation being conducted by the eavesdropper. Even at the side of Alice and Bob, they would also need to try. They would also need to do an exponent operation and then need to compute the value of G power AB. But then if the set is large, then and moreover, if the wireless devices are resource constrained, as I mentioned, these are battery operated devices, and as a result, it has been shown that this is going to take away a lot of energy, right? And therefore, maybe we should explore at new methods for extracting keys between Alice and Bob, which are also computationally very friendly and maybe also secure, right? And that's basically the whole intention. Okay. Now, to take a step back and look at it, now broadly, security can be classified into these two bins. Okay, as shown here. On the right hand side, this is what we already know, which is traditional crypto based security. Basically, all these techniques, the way they are designed in such a way that they will introduce a very hard math problem, okay, for somebody who doesn't have the access to some information, which is the adversary. And then cracking those hard math problems is going to take extremely large amount of time, and then that serves the purpose, right? And one of the main assumptions in classical crypto-based security is that the computing devices that we have at the adversary is also bounded in complexity, meaning as on today, if I take up, let's say, an i7 processor, and then if I try to break down either RSA or AES, how much amount of time can I take? And then it has been it's very well known that it's going to take up years together to recover the information. And of course, looking forward, when we reach quantum computers, and then the story changes, because once we have computing devices which can crack these hard math problems, then that is where the traditional crypto security breaks. And no wonder that's one of the reasons why crypto researchers across the globe are focusing on post-quantum crypto, right? So this is like how to secure systems and networks, or even come up with cryptographic primitives when there are computing devices which are post-quantum, which could actually solve these mathematical problems in a relatively short period of time, right? So that's the very well known bin. And there is one more bin, which is, now I'm going to talk about a bit of wireless communication part of it. Okay, so that's called as the physical layer security, right? So I understand that maybe some of you are familiar with wireless basics or might have heard about this, but then, you know, given that this 1 hour is going to learn something new, I take the liberty of introducing relatively new points which are other than classical security, right? So what is physical layer security? Physical layer security is basically keyless security. Okay, so we are not going to, it's like the theme is going to be that I'm not going to make use of the same philosophy with which crypto based security is designed. My philosophy is that my philosophy is that I'm not going to make an assumption that the attacker has bounded computational complexity, right? Let the attacker have infinite computational complexity. Despite that, is there a way to secure my messages? So that's the philosophy with which physical layer security is designed. And how does that work? So I'm going to call it physical layer. For most of you who are familiar with wireless networks and computer networks, physical layer is basically the bottommost layer of the protocol stack in a communication setup, where, you know, where we have all the packets which are coming in from the higher layer, right? So you have this transport layer, and then you have the medium access control, and then the packets would need to be transmitted in the air. And then just before doing that, you know, they have to be appropriately modulated. What I mean is these packets have to be transformed into some waveforms in terms of temporal domain, time domain, and then these waveforms have to have some properties so that the signal doesn't get degraded at the receiver, right? So these are all the functionalities of the physical layer in order to ensure that somehow the packets must be communicated in the air in such a way that what happens is the wireless medium is also uncertain, because in a mobile environment, when a packet is sent in the air, then what happens is the environment is mobile, and as a result, these radio waves, they're going to get diffracted, reflected, you know, and then they are going to reach the receiver, right? So which means there is going to be successive interference, cancellation, and then, you know, addition, and then so signals the packet which is sent in the air, which is going to hit multiple objects on the path, and then it's going to arrive at the receiver in the physical medium. And then when multiple copies of the signals arrive with potentially different delays, you know, what happens is they could actually add up or could get subtracted, meaning the strength of the signal will vary, right? And then this variation in the strength of the signal is not going to be deterministic, because the mobility of the vehicles around us or many objects around us is not in a deterministic fashion, it's random, right? And therefore we cannot really understand or assume that the variation in the signal strength at the receiver is rather deterministic. So there is some amount of randomness in the way in which signals get deteriorated. Now, that's the whole point of physical layer security. So the idea is that, you know, when Alice communicates the packets to Bob, then, you know, the communication link between Alice and Bob will have some amount of attenuation or some errors. Whereas because even the communication from Alice to Eve is also going to be wireless, because, you know, Eve is only going to overhear the conversation between Alice and Bob, and therefore the channel or the communication medium between Alice and Eve is also going to have a lot of disturbance, right? Now we have two links, one from Alice to Bob, the other from Alice to Eve, and both these links have some disturbance. Now it has been shown in the context of physical layer security that if Alice to Eve's link has more disturbance compared to Alice to Bob's link, then we can appropriately embed our messages in such a way that Bob will receive those messages, but Eve is not going to receive. So it's like saying that Eve has more errors, whereas Bob doesn't have as many. And by using this knowledge of differential magnitude in the errors, there is a way in which we can still embed the information. Let's not call it encryption. It's not encryption. It is basically embedding the information bits or your packets in a smart manner by making use of the fluctuations or the errors introduced by the channel. All right. And then the whole philosophy is that because of this particular nature, even if Eve has infinite computational complexity to decrypt, for example, which was the case with traditional crypto security, even then Eve wouldn't be able to recover the message because inherently the signal strength from on her channel is extremely poor compared to the signal strength at Bob. Okay, and that's the philosophy with which another section of the community is trying to solve the problem of security, possibly in a post-quantum setting, wherein the attacker or the adversary could have abundant complexity resources to solve or crack some of these math problems. Okay, now in the rest of the talk, I'm going to focus on key generation methods, and what I'm going to say is that these key generation methods, they are going to be lying in the intersection of these two pins, because we will make use of some of the concepts from the physical layer security part, as well as the concepts from the crypto-based security part. Okay, and what do I mean by that is, essentially we are looking for alternatives to Diffie-Hellman key exchange. So we have two nodes. They don't want to apply a Diffie-Hellman key exchange type of a method. They want to somehow make use of the environment or the randomness around them in order to generate the keys. And once these keys are generated, done, right? So then what happens? Then they can perhaps use the same set of keys which they have just generated and maybe pass it on to the higher layer of the stack. And then maybe the traditional crypto primitive security can be applied. The only difference is that this time the key is coming from a physical layer security standpoint, and the rest of the procedure remains the same. It's just a replacement to the Diffie-Hellman key exchange. Okay, so with that, I'm going to focus on these parts for the rest of the talk. I'm going to give you some introduction to physical layer key generation. I'm going to spend a lot of time on this because to serve the purpose of this FDP program, hopefully, by the end of this talk, you will have some pieces of information of what this concept is, and then maybe you can pick some advanced concepts in this area. And then if time permits, I'm also going to talk about some of our research results on this topic, and hopefully give you some light on what are the research problems that are open in this space, and what we have done, and then what we can do in future, right? So it's going to be a mix of basics of physical layer key generation, and then some of the research type of results that we have from our lab side. Okay, now, so this is going to be introduction to physical layer key generation. Now, as I mentioned, Alice, Bob, and Eve, these are the good old players. Now, what is the objective? The objective is for Alice and Bob to generate a key, a common key between the two. Let's not go to the step of encryption and confidentiality. That's going to follow next. The objective is only for these two entities to generate a key. Okay, and how do they do the key? How do they generate it? Now, in order to generate a common set of bits, so what's the key? A key is, for example, it's just a random sequence of 128 bits. Okay, now Alice is supposed to generate 128 bits at her side. Bob is also supposed to generate 128 bits as his side, but then these two sequence of bits must be identical. Otherwise, it won't solve the purpose of a common key. And how to do it? Now, one way to do it is using wireless communication. The way it works is, now, as I mentioned, the communication link between Alice and Bob is random, because maybe both Alice and Bob are mobile, and even the environment around them is also not static. It could be vehicles moving around. And then as a result, the variations in the signal strength at Bob, it's fluctuating, and it's also random. Okay, it's not deterministic because the objects in between them are also not deterministic. And as a result, one important point to notice is that if Alice sends a known signal to Bob, it's like, you can think of it like a probing signal. It's like a beacon, right? So you keep transmitting a known signal regularly. Then because the environment between Alice and Bob is random, the signal strength, which is witnessed by Bob, is also fluctuating. And then what happens is Bob gets hold of a random variable, because if he just monitors the signal strength, either in terms of its power or in terms of its absolute value, if he monitors it as a function of time, as given here in this particular picture, it's going to be random. It's going to be varying as a function of time, right? Now, that's a good news, because in order to generate a key, we need a randomness. We need randomness, right? Because if it's not random, then if it is deterministic, then even Eve could try to reconstruct the same key, right? So we don't want Eve to be able to reconstruct the same, right? So the good news is there is some randomness here. Now, this randomness is not sufficient. Why? Because it's a common key, and which means Alice must also generate the same sequence of bits. And how does she do it? Now, similarly, like what Alice did, after some amount of time, Bob is also going to generate beacons, right? Standard common signals from Bob to Alice. And again, Alice, because the medium is again changing, Alice is also going to monitor the variation in the signal strength at her side. And then even she sees that the variation in the signal strength is random. Okay. So the good news is both the signal strengths observed at Alice and Bob are random. Now, if they are random and if they are statistically independent, then that's not of no use, because they would need to end up with a common sequence of bits. And if they are random, then what happens is Bob may generate 128 bits, and then Alice may generate another 128 bits, and these bits may not be common. And then even if there is a fraction of bits that are different between these two sequences, then they can't be used to generate a key and subsequently use it to for the encryption purposes, right? Now, what makes it, what is the physics behind the property that the randomness witnessed at Alice and Bob are almost similar or very close? Now, it has been shown, this is again backing some results from wireless communication. If these two nodes exchange probing signals between each other very quickly, not too much time, then it has been shown that the variation observed by Bob and the variation observed by Alice, they are going to be not identical, because having them identical is just not possible, right? Because both of them have some hardware devices, and these hardwares have their own impurities and have their own randomness, have their own issues, and because of which there is some amount of thermal noise in their devices. And then if you look at the variations in the signal received at Bob and Alice, they can never be identical. But what we want is we want it to be correlated. Okay, so there has to be some amount of correlation. If there is no correlation, then they're going to be statistically independent, which means we cannot do anything in terms of key generation. Okay, so that's a good news. Point to take home is that if they exchange these messages quite regularly within a given amount of time, then indeed they can observe variations in their signal strength that are highly correlated across a time domain. So that takes care of randomness. It also takes care of the common randomness. What I mean by common is there is correlation between the two. Now, they are not yet identical. So that's the next step. Now, let's take a step back and see what happens to Eve. Now, Eve is also observing the signal strength at her side, right? Now, what is known is, now, if the position of Eve is at least λ/2 distance away from Alice, so lambda is basically the wavelength of the carrier that is used to communicate, right? And what is known is, because Eve is situated at a different location compared to Bob, now because of the change in locations, okay, now the signal that she is going to witness may have a different strength, because the way in which the wireless signal gets bumped into multiple objects around and then arrive at Eve it's going to be slightly different from the way it happens at Bob. And as a result, it has been shown that the variations in Eve signal strength is going to be independent that of Alice and Bob, provided Eve is at a distance which is sufficiently large compared to Alice and Bob. Okay. Now that's a great news. So what it means is, if these two nodes, Alice and Bob, if they follow this procedure, then they can actually acquire a signal between them, which is independent of the signal seen by Eve. That's a good news. And it's also correlated between the two, which means they can somehow do something to finally get bits out of it, right? So what remains to be seen in this basic process is that how can Alice and Bob make use of these correlated variations in the signal strength and convert them into bits. Remember, ultimately, both these nodes need to have a sequence of bits, zeros and ones of, let's say, length 128, and then it has to be sufficiently random. Okay. Now, we have done this part now. Now, what is pending is that they need to somehow convert these waveforms into bits. And how is this done? So as shown here, now there are classical names given to it. Now, when we focused on the randomness part of it, because keys cannot be deterministic, that is usually called or contributed by what is called as multipath fading. Multipath fading is usually a very well-known term used in wireless networks and communication. It is basically the randomness provided by the mobility of vehicles around us and objects around us. And the common part of it, which is the randomness seen by Alice and Bob, they're correlated, and that is usually called as the reciprocity. And then it has been shown that it is possible to achieve this correlation. Now, what happens in the end, as you can see in this particular slide, there is going to be some variation observed at Alice, similar variation also observed by Bob. This is just by exchanging some known signals. This is what is known as channel probing. And then we can think of using basic quantization techniques. What it means is, you know, all I could do is I could draw a horizontal line on this mean value. Okay, I could observe the waveform here, and then I can take the mean value of the signal. And then when we take the mean value, and then I can say that, you know, all the samples that are above the mean value, I'm going to name it bit 1. And all the samples that are below the mean value, I'm going to call it a 0, right? So it's like, although these variations are in real numbers, because, you know, it's like, you know, they could be like very small numbers and decimal values with this variation. I'm going to discretize that by drawing a mean value, and then I'm going to do only a classification. Meaning if it lies above the line, it's 1. If it lies below the line, it is 0, right? That's one straightforward way of generating a sequence of bits between at least at one side. Now, the same procedure is also repeated at Bob, and then Bob can also generate another sequence. Again, remember that these two signals, which are in real time, they need not be identical. In fact, they are not identical, they're only correlated. And as a result, it is possible that some bits that are generated by quantizing at Bob's side can be different from the bit that is generated at Alice because of the noise in the system. And then what it means is just this level of quantization is not sufficient, because if you just stop the whole procedure at this stage, then these sequences cannot be used as a key because they are no longer common, they are not identical, and we want them to be identical. So what happens next? In the next step, they need to somehow ensure that the bits that were different between each other must be corrected. What I mean by correction is they somehow must discover that, look, you have a 1 here, and I don't think I have a 1 in this location. Maybe you should flip it to 0, right? Similarly, look, you have a 0 here, and I don't think I have a 0 at that position. Maybe you should flip it to 1. So essentially, they need to make some changes in their bits in order to ensure that these sequence of bits are identical. And this is typically what is called as the reconciliation process. Okay. Now, finally, once they generate a long sequence of bits that is that are identical, and usually it is not also sufficient. We need to also ensure that the randomness of these sequences is also maximum. Okay, and in order to do that, there is another step done at the end, which is usually called as the privacy amplification. And a standard way to achieve this is, as all of you know, we could just pass these information bits at the penultimate stage to what is known as a hash function, right? So if you just can pass it to a hash function, then you can try to get a short amount of bits, and then short sequence of bits, and then that are fairly random, right? So this is basically the big picture of how Alice and Bob would generate bits at each side, at their side, and which are identical. Now think about it. This is going to be a replacement to the Diffie-Hellman key exchange, right? Now you may ask, what is so good about this scheme? Well, Diffie-Hellman was also able to do it quite well, and it's also well known, right? But then the point to note here is that we are looking at this as an alternative in order to help resource constrained devices. So if you look at it, now if you look at the complexity of this particular module, Alice and Bob would need to exchange beacons between the two quite regularly. Now, in a wireless network setting, it is usually communicating devices. They do regularly communicate beacons between the two in order to learn the environment and then figure out many interesting things in the environment, so that they could have an adaptive system to have a communication link between the two. So the claim is that this type of probing signals are usually regularly exchanged anyway. And this should not be seen as a burden, or it should not be seen as an additional step that these two devices must implement. So that forms as sort of a piggybacking on the existing communication protocols. And once that is done, the only set of operations that are in addition to this are quantization and reconciliation. And if we can implement these methods on low complexity algorithms, then the claim is that the entire process of getting zeros and ones can be achieved with a much lower complexity compared to the Diffie-Hellman key exchange. So that's the big picture of why the community is interested in these things, right? So I forgot to mention one point. Now, what happens is that the waveform at one side and the other side, right? These are not identical. This we have covered already. And then if you just draw the mean value of these waveforms and then do a quantization of zeros and ones, that can also sometimes backfire. And the reason is these two waveforms could be noisy, and as a result, we may need to do something more smart. And what is that? Now, that is usually what is called as the use of guard bands. Now, the idea is actually encapsulated here in this particular picture. Now, you have two waveforms here, the one in pink, the other one in blue. Now, you can think of these waveforms as one of them is observed at Alice, and the other one is observed at Bob, right? Now, because these are not identical, you can see that at some locations, there is a bit of difference between the two, right? Now, if we apply the mean value and just draw one line, then we can actually have a lot of errors at the bit level. So what it means is, if you go back to the previous slide, then at this stage of quantization, we may end up having a lot of errors in the bit location between this sequence and this sequence. And if the number of errors is extremely large or comparable to the length of the code, then it is not really worth it, because then the rest of the procedure for reconciliation has to be on correcting these bits. That's not the whole point, right? So the point is to make sure that this sequence of operations is as low complex as possible, right? So in order to ensure that after you quantize, the sequence of bits that we have are almost the same with a few changes possibly, we use the concept of what is called as a guard band. Now, the guard band meaning, you don't have a single line as the mean value. What you do is you form a thick line, meaning you form a band, okay? And then, the band, the size of the band is up to you, Okay, suppose let's say you form a thick band like this, and then what you do is, if a sample lies inside the band, you just discard it. Okay, you're saying that, I'm not going to consider this sample for key generation. But if the sample is outside these bands, then only you consider. Now the advantage of doing this is that you are going to ensure that the bits that are generated out of this process, they are as close as possible. And why is this? This is because if you look at it here, the band is, we have represented here in two horizontal lines, right? Now the thickness or the width of this band is something which is up to us. Okay. Now what happens is, if you intuitively look at it, if you increase the width of this band, then a lot of samples is going to enter this band. And then as per the protocol, we may have to drop it. Now, if we drop it, then we're only going to look at samples that are outside these bands. And then we are going to consider them as ones or zeros, depending on where they lie. But then if you look at it, the total number of bits which is extracted out of this is only going to be very few, because most of them got sucked inside the band, right? So it does help in errors, but in reducing the errors, but we actually lose out on a lot of bits. However, if you want to, but what is the advantage of this? The advantage is that if you increase the band, if you look at the samples that lie inside the band, these are potentially those samples which were actually got flipped from one node to another. Meaning, maybe the samples were very close to start with, but then because of the noise introduced at the other user, Bob, maybe that sample got flipped and moved to the other zone, right? And then because it moved across the band, we were actually calling it as a 1 instead of a 0, right? And this error from bit 1 to bit 0 was introduced by the noise in the system, right? So naturally, if the band is thin, we are actually allowing a lot of samples to protrude inside the band, through the band, and then cross the layer and move into another region, which is basically the source of errors. Whereas if you increase the band, we can possibly arrest these transitions, and then we can ensure that the error in the bit sequence is as low as possible, right? So one of the interesting questions in this space is that how to choose the band, okay? If I am very conservative, I can actually, if I'm not comfortable with a lot of errors, I can just enlarge the band, but then that would be a very conservative approach. I mean, we may do very well in terms of errors, but then I may also lose out on the number of bits, because ultimately I would need to generate 128 bits, 128 sequence of 128 bits in order to feed to my possibly an AES encryption technique. But then, to generate 128 bits, it may take more time, right? Because if we are increasing the band size, then we may end up only getting maybe 15 to 20 bits every time. And then we may have to run this procedure multiple times. And then this may result in a huge delay. And then this may not really match the refresh rates in which the keys must be updated on a regular pattern, right? So that's where these are very interesting problems from, how to choose the band size in order to sort of solve the tension between the error in the mismatch of the keys as well as the number of bits that are generated. Now, the procedure has to be done so once they have these bit sequences, this procedure has to be conducted over the public channel. And then remember that the eavesdropper is still watching the conversation, because at the end of the day, eavesdropper wants to mimic all the operations so that even she could extract the bits at her side, right? Now, in order to prevent it, what these two nodes do is so for example, once they decide on the location and the size of the band, now Alice, for the first user, it is only going to convey the locations of those samples that are away from the band, which are outside the band, okay? So for example, if you look at samples from 150 to 250, that's how they're indexed. And then Alice is not going to say what my bit is or what is the position of the bit, because that would leak information to the eavesdropper. So for example, if you look at these 4 bits, maybe these are, let's say 162, 163, 164, 165, perhaps, right? So Alice is only going to communicate the index number to Bob. Now, what Bob does is, Bob implements its own level of quantization using the same band size and other details. And then it will look at the same index, 162, 163, 164. And then it will look at its side. If he also has those 4 locations above the band, then they both are in consensus that, look, these 4 positions are outside the band, and maybe we can make use of these positions to construct a bit. But then, you know, if both these 4 locations are above the band, then, you know, Alice would make it 1, and Bob would also make it 1. Whereas if those 4 locations on one side is lower the band, then that would be converted to 0. So that's basically leading to an error. So that's the, in essence, that is how they need to carefully choose the size of the band in order to ensure that the bit errors between these 2 sequences are as small as possible. Okay, so I'm just going to give you a brief literature review on what has been done. So this idea of key generation using wireless communication is fairly well studied, meaning it's easily 10 years old. Okay, but it's not too old in terms of research. There are a lot of open problems in this as well. So as you can see, people have worked on this topic on various platforms. They have looked at it in optical networks. They have looked at it in terms of OFDM. OFDM is a very well-known modulation technique, which is used in our regular Wi-Fi communication, as well as 5G and 4G networks. These ideas have been looked at with multiple antenna systems, wherein, you know, we have these devices which have more than one antenna, and there have been rich studies on the theory part of it, meaning how many bits can we extract at maximum, and there have been also experimental studies to verify these ideas, right? Now, that's basically it. So as far as 2-user key generation, what I mean by 2-user key generation is, we have Alice, we have Bob. They just wanted to communicate between each other securely, so they generated a key using physical layer key generation. They did not do Diffie-Hellman, but they did something extra, right? And that's like a very primitive model of key generation. But in general, if you think about it, why just Alice and Bob? We could also have you know, multiple users in the group. It's like how we form a WhatsApp group, right? So we could have multiple users. It's like multiple vehicles in a vehicular network, where they could where they would like to generate a common key among them. So it's like one key among all the 6 users or 7 users. And there are very interesting applications, you know. So maybe, you know, they want to share a message among themselves. Maybe they want to broadcast, but that must not be heard by other users which are external to their group, right? In which case they may still have to do some sort of symmetric key encryption, wherein they all have the same key, right? But again, you know, when there is no base station and then there is user-to-user communication or device-to-device communication, how to ensure that these nodes have a common key? It's the same thing, common key generation technique problem. But the only generalization here is that there are no 2 users, there are more than 2 users, which means all these techniques that we just discussed in terms of the basic concepts must be somehow generalized, and in order to apply that to arbitrary number of users in this network. And then while those are the challenges, but then, you know, as far as the adversary is concerned, Eve would still be trying to listen to the conversation and then extract the key somehow, right? So the objectives of secure key exchange mechanism continues to hold. The only thing is generalization from 2 users to multiple users. Now, I know that you know, we are short on time significantly, but my point was to somehow convey you some basics of these key generation ideas, so that, you know, we could perhaps pick on these contents offline sometime later. Okay, so with the rest of maybe 5-10 minutes, I'm going to give you some open problems in in this field of group key generation, and then maybe we can have some questions, maybe give some time for Q&A possibly, because it's already 11:15, right? So now, as I said, group key generation is where there are multiple parties that would need to generate a common key among them. And then that has to be done not by using generalizations of Diffie-Hellman key exchange, but that must be done by making use of physical layer key generation. Now, to drive home a set of problem statements, I'm going to focus the rest of the time on this particular slide. Okay. Now, here we have a very basic study case of 3 users, because we are in the scope of 3-user network, because we're in the scope of group key generation, where there are multiple users in the network. Let us start with the challenges that it has in the simplest case of 3 users, because this technically qualifies as a group. Okay. Now we have node 1, node 2, and node 3, which would like to generate a common key among them. Okay. Now I'm going to discuss 2 types of methods in order to generate a group key between them. Okay. And then we'll discuss the pros and cons on them. Now let's focus on the picture on the left-hand side, right? Now we will have to generate a key using the randomness offered by the physical medium. Now between node 1 and node 2, the wireless medium, let us just denote it by H12. So evidently the subscript 12 indicates that the communication link is between node 1 and node 2. Likewise, the subscript here 23 indicates between these 2, and therefore, and also 13 indicates between these 3. Okay. Now, remember that all these 3 nodes must have a common key at the end of the process. Okay. Now, one trivial way to apply key generation is as follows. Okay. Now, forget about node 3. So you have node 1 and node 2. They will generate a key between the 2 using the techniques that were just explained a couple of slides back. It's like what happened between Alice and Bob. Okay. And let's call it, we are not going to enter those details, but then, those methods are applied in order to generate a key between these nodes. So let's going to call this key as K12, evidently saying that this is between 1 and 2. And likewise, what happens, node 1 is also going to generate a key with node 3 by using the environment between these 2, and we are going to call it as K13. Okay. So these 2 are 2 different procedures which are going to mimic whatever we saw with respect to Alice and Bob. And then now remember that node 1, node 2 have a key, and node 1, node 3 have a key. But in order to establish a group key, all the 3 nodes must have the same key, common key, otherwise it doesn't work. So one simple trick is that because this node 1 has the knowledge of both K12 as well as K13, it could simply do a bit XOR, meaning, it's like 1 XOR 0, and then it could, whatever is the output of this XOR, it could just broadcast it to both the nodes. Okay. And then if this is broadcast to node 2, because node 2 already has K12 with it, it can extract node K13. And similarly, because node 3 already has K13, it can extract K12. And then in the process, you realize that all these 3 nodes now have both K12 and K13. Okay. Now that's a great piece of news, because they have a common key, and this was just able to execute because of the XOR operation. Okay, good. Now, is there any problem here? Well, there is no problem as such, because if you look at it, the eavesdropper, who is actually not here in the picture, would also be witnessing the conversation among the 3. But then if you look at the basic operation of XORing, okay, now the eavesdropper, wherever she is placed, she would also be able to listen to K12 plus K13, because it's an XOR operation which was sent in the air. And now the eavesdropper doesn't know both K12 and K13 individually. All that it knows is the XOR value. For example, XOR of 1 and 0 is 1, 0 and 1 is 1, 1 and 1 is 0, 0 and 0 is 0. Now imagine if eavesdropper observes 0. Okay. Now she doesn't know whether this 0 has arrived because of 1 plus 1 or 0 plus 0, right? Which means she doesn't have any idea on what could be the key. it's that means it is equiprobable, right? Which that is as much as information as she had before observing that. Similarly, if she observes a bit 1, then this bit 1 could be because, you know, one could be 0 and the other could be 1, and the other could be 0 and the first one could be 1 because of its ambiguity. So it's not possible for the eavesdropper to figure out what the key was, and therefore the entire scheme is fully complete. It's also secure. Now, I'm going to focus on a few minutes to comment on the fact that this particular way of key generation is also not secure completely. And the reason is that if you look at the picture on the left, this is basically trusting node 1 completely, okay? Because if you look at it, node 1 has a lot of responsibilities in this network. It has to generate the keys with the other nodes, and also it needs to do some sort of an XOR operation and then broadcast, without which all the nodes won't be able to generate the common key, right? Now, if you think about it, you know, if you think in the terms of, let's say, distributed ledger or you know, blockchain technologies, the philosophy is the same in peer-to-peer network. We don't want to really trust anybody because these nodes could be normal users, right? And then if you're asking one user to take all the responsibilities, and then let's say if that particular user turns rogue or maybe execute what is usually called as an insider attack, then the entire scheme gets compromised. Therefore, we need to have a methodology to generate a key wherein we don't really rely on only one person in the group. Everybody must play a role, but we should not give undue responsibility to only one person. And hopefully, if in case that person trusts, and if it's untrusted, or if that person is not legitimate, or if it turns out, if it executes an insider attacks, then the whole thing gets compromised, right? That's the disadvantage with this scheme. So an alternative to the whole setting is a research problem, and it is called as group key generation in a decentralized setting. What it means is we are going to take the help of node 1, but we are not going to ask it to perform an XOR operation, but we are going to ask it to do something else, okay, in such a way that even if it misbehaves by manipulating some of the values, the other nodes would still be able to detect it. This is basically what was the motivation between the distributed ledger idea for blockchain, right? So again, you know, if this particular node 1, if it manipulates K12 somehow, okay, then and after that, if the XOR is broadcasted, then node 3 would just take it as it is, and then it would try to make use of it as a group key, but then they will realize that you know, the keys are mismatched. Whereas in the decentralized setting, the node 1 is not going to do XOR because it is not allowed to handle the sequence of bits at a digital level. Anything that it wants to perform, it needs to broadcast something at the signal level itself. And then we can show that if it does any manipulation at the signal level, instead of doing at the bit level, the other nodes can potentially catch it by doing some sort of integrity check, and which cannot be really done by making use of a bit XOR, right? So that's where you know, group key generation is headed towards, according to our group. Basically, you have a number of users. They want to generate a key among them. They don't have any common source of information, but they don't even trust each other. So it's like totally untrusted environment. They still want to communicate to form a group. How to execute that? We think that, you know, we should look at decentralized settings where we need to mimic some of the ideas that are that can be borrowed from a blockchain related ideas. Okay, so there are a number of interesting things that can be done. I mean, initially I was thinking of you know, showing you one such case of a decentralized setting. I was inclined to show you a technique of generating a key in a decentralized setting, but then, you know, in the interest of the time, given that just we have 5 more minutes, I'm just going to skip that. So I'm going to skip a lot of things, but result in, I mean, maybe come to one point that I would like to drive away from this very short conversation is that in the context of wireless networks that are especially going to be deployed in next generation, all the nodes are not going to talk to the base station alone. Devices would need to talk to devices, but these devices wouldn't have any common information. And as a result, it is important to have a key between them, which has low complexity in operations. And only then we can try to use symmetric key encryption type of techniques in order to help provide the confidentiality. But then, if two users have to do it, it is possible. But then if multiple users have to generate a key among themselves, there are interesting open problems, especially because of the trust that I just mentioned. There are a decentralized setting, there are untrusted users. How to still work with untrusted users and still be able to generate a key and then securely communicate among each other is an interesting direction for research. Okay, so other than doing these type of things, our lab at IIT Delhi, we also try to implement these algorithms on a test bed of wireless devices. For example, this entire study on key exchange mechanisms in a wireless setting, this we have implemented it in our lab setting. For example, if you can see at this picture, we have these laptops which are connected to what are called as XB devices. So these are wireless modules, and either these wireless modules could be connected to laptops for computing, or we could connect these to maybe Raspberry Pis. These are self-sustaining computing devices. So we have made use of these devices in our lab setting to implement all the key exchange mechanisms that we have discussed. We have implemented Diffie-Hellman, we have implemented physical layer key generation techniques, and to study the efficiency of these techniques. Okay, so basically some of the all the contents of this talk, or the area in which we were working on, this is a part of a funded project from Department of Telecommunications. So we would like to also thank the funding agency DOT for giving us funding to work on these topics and also develop some interesting prototypes in this particular area. Okay, so last minute, I know that I could not get into the details of advanced key generation techniques that I wanted to share, but the goal, given that this is an FDP program, is to somehow make a point that you have some idea of what is physical layer key generation, what is the basics of it, and what are the objectives of in that nature. And then hopefully with this piece of information, you will be able to go back and then read more articles related to this and then figure out related issues. And if you want to really know more, I'll be happy to answer any of your emails or queries to give you some details on what's happening in this area, and then maybe we can also have more interaction on this. Okay, so thank you very much, Dr. Geeta, for giving me this invitation, and maybe I will hand over the control to the organizers. I'll be happy to take some questions on this matter.
Thank you, sir, for the highly informative session. The specialty is you have explained the fundamentals behind security very clearly, starting from the fundamental pillars of security like confidentiality, integrity, availability. Then you were told about what is 5G network, then device to device communication and vehicle to vehicle communication. Then what is the necessity of low latency communication? And next thing is, very beautifully you have explained the symmetric key generation, that is the physical layer key generation, which is definitely helpful for the researchers who are attending the session. Also, we are very much thankful for showing the lab setup of your institution, that is IIT Delhi. Now, on behalf of the organizers and the participants, I extend our sincere gratitude for enlightening us.
Once again, ma'am, sorry for the interrupt. Sir, can you stop the sharing, please?
Yeah. Sure.
Yeah, you continue, ma'am.
Yes, sir. Thank you. So I thank you on behalf of the organizers and the participants, our sincere gratitude for enlightening us about the security of connected devices in the next generation network. Now I request our HOD ma'am, Dr. S. Geeta, to thank the session in charge. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Victor. Before I just conclude the session, Harshan sir, if you don't mind, we have received question from the participants. The questions are, is there any facility for security research from remotely like simulative labs, or if any? Is there any facility for the security research from remotely like simulative labs, or if any?
Yeah, so thanks for this. In fact, this particular project funded by DOT, the initiative was to convey this. So the idea of DOT was to build a test bed at the national level. It's a multi-institutional project wherein we have mainly led by IIT Madras and along with IIT Hyderabad, Kanpur, Bombay, Delhi, and IISc. So the whole vision is to set up a 5G test bed across these institutes, so that we could encourage research on these platforms by being able to remotely log into these facilities. For example, we have a 5G security test bed from our lab at IIT Delhi, and by the end of the project, the idea is we must be able to provide access of these modules to various participants who would be interested in conducting research. And then so that, for example, we have a 5G security module built in our lab. And then anybody who wants to implement a 5G security or learn more or do research, maybe we could give APIs to these entities, and then, they could conduct research or maybe update our modules and then be a part of the research. In principle, that was the vision of DOT, and we are in the process. The project is yet to get completed, but that is where we are headed towards.
Thank you, sir. The next question is, what's the significance of leaky coax cable in a setup? What is the significance of leaky coax cable in a setup?
Okay, so this leaky coaxial cable has got nothing to do with the problem of key generation as such. But then, given that this question has been asked, I'm going to give you a use case. Okay, now a leaky coaxial cable, as the name suggests, it leaks. So it's a normal coaxial cable, but then in the design procedure, what you do is you make holes in it at regular space intervals. Then what happens is, whenever there is transmission happening across the coaxial cables, it leaks energy. Okay, and then this is particularly used in underground tunnels and even in in urban metro systems. So for example, whenever there is a subway or whenever a train passes through a tunnel, right, and then if it is, let's say, an unmanned vehicle, a driverless vehicle, then what happens is there is still the control system of the train must talk to the control center, right? And one way to do it is we could deploy leaky cables at the ceiling of these tunnels, all right? And then when any signal is sent from the control center, the radiation, it leaks. Okay, essentially they act like antennas. And then when the train is on board on a track, it basically picks these radiation and then gets the signal. Similarly, when the signal is sent from the train, then what happens is these gaps in the leaky coaxial cables, they pick this radiation and then subsequently communicate it to the control center. So in short, leaky cables act as antennas in environments where there is no open air. So also very interesting research related questions on security with leaky cables, and we had that as part of the lab, but it's got nothing to do with key generation of this topic.
Okay, two more questions are there, but due to time constraint, I'll just mail you the questions and the participants. Once we receive from the reply from Dr. Harshan, we'll just get back to you. With this, really, I thank Dr. Harshan. We have enjoyed in listening your session today. As Dr. Victor said, you have just started with the basic, and we made us to think what we have to do next. Really, we have to thank you, sir. Thank you for being with us today, and you.